the hilarious yet heartbreaking medical truth. Welcome to the absurd, blood-soaked, and utterly heartbreaking reality of life in a hospital ward. Through the secret diaries of a former junior doctor, this story uncovers the extreme sacrifices made by the people hidden beneath the scrubs. It is a wildly funny, yet profoundly moving journey that exposes the breaking point of the medical profession. You will laugh out loud, gasp in horror, and ultimately view the doctors who treat you with completely newfound reverence. Point 1. Welcome to the front line of chaos. Stepping out of medical school and into the wards for the first time is a transition that no textbook can properly prepare you for. You spend half a decade in lecture halls, memorizing the intricate pathways of the Krebs cycle, studying the precise anatomy of the human nervous system, and learning the Latin names of every bone in the body. You graduate feeling like a conqueror of science, armed with a stethoscope and a head full of noble ideals about saving humanity. But the moment you badge into the hospital for your very first shift as a house officer, the absolute bottom rung of the medical hierarchy, you realize that medical school is like learning to sail on dry land. The ward is a raging hurricane, and you have just been tossed directly into the eye of the storm. The reality of being a junior doctor is entirely stripped of the glamour you see in television medical dramas. There are no dramatic pauses, no perfectly lit moments of epiphany, and certainly no time to sit by a patient's bedside having profound philosophical conversations about the meaning of life. Instead, your existence is instantly defined by a small, tyrannical piece of black plastic clipped to your belt, the bleep. This pager dictates your every move, your every meal, and your every bathroom break. When it goes off, it is a shrill, demanding noise that sends a spike of pure adrenaline straight into your heart. You quickly learn to fear that sound because it usually means someone, somewhere, in the massive, labyrinthine hospital is deteriorating, and you are the only person available to fix it. During the day, a house officer is essentially a glorified, highly stressed administrator. You are part of a massive team, trailing behind the senior consultants like a flock of terrified ducklings. Your job is to perform the endless, mundane tasks that keep the hospital machinery grinding forward. You take blood, you insert intravenous cannulas into veins that refuse to cooperate, you write endless reams of discharge letters, and you spend an inordinate amount of time trying to track down a working printer. It is exhausting, but there is a safety net. If something goes catastrophically wrong, you can always turn around and find a senior doctor to take the reins. There are adults in the room. But everything changes when the sun goes down. Night shifts are a profound exercise in human endurance and psychological terror. The senior doctors go home to their beds, the staffing levels plummet to dangerously low numbers, and suddenly, the safety net is gone. The hospital at night is a totally different beast. The fluorescent lights overhead hum with a sterile, relentless energy, casting a pale, ghostly glow over the linoleum floors. You are running on a dangerous, volatile cocktail of terrible instant coffee, stale vending machine chocolate, and pure, unfiltered panic. The sheer volume of patients you are responsible for is staggering. A single junior doctor might be covering hundreds of beds across multiple wards. Imagine being 23 years old, severely sleep-deprived, and holding the lives of 400 sick strangers in your hands. You are sprinting down endless corridors, your mind racing through emergency algorithms and drug dosages, praying that you do not make a fatal calculation error. Every time you arrive at a ward, a nurse thrusts a chart into your hands, demanding immediate decisions. A patient's blood pressure is crashing, another is struggling to breathe, a third is having a severe allergic reaction. You have to prioritize who gets your attention first, essentially performing a mental triage of who is most likely to die if you do not intervene in the next 3 minutes. The physical toll of this lifestyle is immediate and brutal. You forget what it feels like to have a normal circadian rhythm. You sleep in bizarre, uncomfortable positions in whatever quiet corner you can find, slumped over a desk in the doctor's mess, curled up in a broken office chair, or leaning against a wall in the radiology department. Your diet consists entirely of whatever can be consumed in under 2 minutes while simultaneously walking down a hallway. You become intimately familiar with the exact location of every vending machine in a 5-mile radius, measuring your nutritional intake in terms of processed sugar and caffeine. Yet, amidst this terrifying baptism by fire, a strange sort of camaraderie begins to form. You bond with the other junior doctors through the shared trauma of the trenches. You learn to rely on the phenomenal experience of the senior nurses, who often know far more about practical medicine than you do, and will quietly save you from making catastrophic mistakes if you have the humility to listen to them. You begin to develop a thick skin, learning to mask your internal panic with a calm, authoritative exterior. The patients look at you and see a doctor, a trusted professional in a white coat or scrubs, and they have no idea that beneath that professional facade, you are desperately trying to remember the correct protocol for managing a pulmonary embolism while silently begging the universe not to let anyone die on your watch. This is the chaotic, terrifying, and profoundly humbling beginning of a medical career. It is the crucible in which doctors are forged. The illusions of grandeur are violently stripped away, replaced by the gritty, exhausting reality of keeping human beings alive against the odds. It is a terrifying way to live, but as you survive your first few months, a tiny, resilient spark of confidence begins to grow. You realize that despite the chaos, the exhaustion, and the sheer terror of the bleep, you are actually doing it. You are practicing medicine. And as you will soon discover, the bizarre, messy reality of the human body is about to provide you with an education far more shocking than anything you could have ever imagined. Point 2. Bodily fluids in sleep deprivation. If medical school teaches you the pristine, idealized mechanics of human anatomy, the hospital ward forcefully introduces you to the messy, foul-smelling, and profoundly undignified reality of what bodies actually do. Medicine at its core is not a glamorous pursuit of intellectual puzzle solving. It is a visceral, hands-on battle against the endless tide of bodily fluids. As a junior doctor, you quickly realize that your entire existence revolves around blood, vomit, feces, urine, pus, and various other unidentifiable substances that the human body produces in moments of distress. You are no longer just a scholar of science. You are an incredibly overeducated plumber dealing with the most complex and fragile pipes in the world. The sheer gross out factor of the job is something that outsiders simply cannot comprehend. Normal people go about their lives blissfully unaware of the horrific things their bodies are capable of. But in the emergency department and the surgical wards, the veil is lifted. You are confronted with the absolute extremes of human vulnerability. You have to manually disimpact the bowels of elderly patients who have not been to the toilet in weeks. You have to drain massive, angry abscesses that smell so vile they can clear a room in seconds. You have to manage horrific lacerations, shattered bones, and wounds that defy logical explanation. To survive this daily onslaught of gore and tragedy, medical professionals develop a very specific, fiercely dark sense of humor. It is a psychological shield, a necessary coping mechanism that allows them to process the bizarre and often horrific things they witness without completely losing their minds. To an outsider, this humor might seem callous or deeply inappropriate, but within the walls of the hospital, it is the only thing keeping the staff sane. When you see the absolute worst moments of people's lives on a daily Tuesday afternoon, you either laugh or you cry. And if you start crying, you will never be able to stop, and you will never be able to finish your shift. The general public, it turns out, is endlessly creative when it comes to inflicting bizarre injuries upon themselves. The emergency department is a revolving door of human absurdity. Take, for example, the astonishing phenomenon of things getting stuck in places they absolutely do not belong. There is a running joke in medicine about the classic patient excuse, "I slipped and fell on it." The sheer variety of household objects that doctors have had to surgically remove from patients' rectums is mind-boggling. From remote controls to various fruits and vegetables, the medical staff has seen it all. One of the most perfectly absurd anecdotes involves a patient who decided to propose to his girlfriend in a uniquely terrible way. He hid an engagement ring inside a plastic Kinder Surprise egg capsule, and then, for reasons known only to him, decided to insert that capsule into a certain bodily orifice, planning to retrieve it later for a romantic surprise. Unsurprisingly, physics and human anatomy conspired against him. The capsule became irretrievably stuck, and the grand romantic gesture ended in a highly embarrassing trip to the emergency room, complete with surgical intervention and a very confused, unamused girlfriend. These are the moments where you have to bite the inside of your cheek until it bleeds to maintain a professional, unsmiling facade while explaining the medical procedure to remove the plastic egg. And then there are the injuries that are simply horrifying, yet tinged with an absurd kind of tragedy. Consider the concept of a degloved finger. It sounds almost polite, like taking off a winter accessory. The reality is far more gruesome. It happens when a ring catches on a fast-moving object, like a fence you're jumping over, or machinery you were working with. The force pulls the ring with such violence that it strips the skin, tissue, and nerves right off the bone, leaving behind a skeletal finger. It is a horrific, agonizing injury, yet it is often the result of something as mundane as trying to catch a bus. Dealing with a screaming patient, a severed piece of flesh, and the absolute chaos of the trauma room requires a level of emotional detachment that is deeply unnatural. This emotional detachment is the double-edged sword of the medical profession. On one hand, you absolutely must compartmentalize. If you deeply internalize the pain and suffering of every single patient you treat, you will burn out in a matter of weeks. You have to view the illness as an abstract problem to be solved, almost like a mechanic viewing a broken engine. You focus on the puzzle, the blood test results, the x-rays, the surgical techniques. You treat the symptom, you stabilize the vitals, and you move on to the next bed. But on the other hand, this constant exposure to trauma and the necessity of detachment begins to fundamentally alter how you view the world. The boundary between the hospital and the outside world thickens. You start to see ordinary people on the street not as humans, but as walking collections of potential medical emergencies. You look at a man coughing on the bus and mentally diagnose him with tuberculosis. You see a child riding a bicycle without a helmet and instantly picture the skull fractures you treated the night before. The sleep deprivation amplifies this surreal perspective. When you are working 90 hours a week, oscillating wildly between day shifts and night shifts, your brain begins to misfire. You experience microsleeps while standing up. You hallucinate the sound of your pager going off when you are miles away from the hospital. The chronic fatigue settles into your bones, a deep, heavy exhaustion that no amount of sleep on your rare days off can ever truly cure. You are permanently jet-lagged, operating in a twilight zone where the only things that feel real are the sterile walls of the ward, the smell of antiseptic, and the relentless driving need to keep the fragile human bodies in your care from falling apart. It is a bizarre, exhausting existence, but you push through it because you have finally chosen a specialty. You have decided which specific corner of the medical battlefield you are going to dedicate your life to. Point 3. Choosing life, death, and obstetrics. In the sprawling, chaotic ecosystem of the hospital, every junior doctor eventually has to make a monumental decision, choosing a specialty. This decision dictates the entire trajectory of your career, the type of patients you will see, the hours you will work, and the specific brand of stress you will endure until retirement. Some choose the meticulous, puzzle-solving world of internal medicine, diagnosing obscure diseases like medical detectives. Others are drawn to the brute force and immediate gratification of orthopedics, where broken bones are fixed with drills, screws, and sheer physical strength. But out of all the possible paths, the decision to specialize in obstetrics and gynecology (ONG) is entirely unique. In the darkly affectionate slang of the hospital, it is known as the Department of Brats and Twats. The appeal of obstetrics is, at first glance, incredibly obvious and deeply beautiful. It is the only department in the entire hospital where the primary purpose is not to manage disease, decay, or death, but to facilitate the arrival of new life. In geriatrics, you are managing the slow, inevitable decline of the human body. In oncology, you are fighting brutal, desperate battles against cancer. But in the labor ward, the patients are usually young, healthy, and going through a perfectly natural biological process. When things go well, it is the most joyous place on earth, delivering a baby, Hearing that first miraculous, piercing cry fill the room and handing a healthy newborn to a weeping, overwhelmed mother is a high that no drug could ever replicate. It is pure, unadulterated magic, and it makes all the sleepless nights and grueling shifts feel profoundly worthwhile. However, the labor ward is also a place of absolute, unbridled chaos. Childbirth is a primal, messy, and incredibly unpredictable event. Women in the throes of labor are experiencing arguably the most intense pain a human being can endure, and the delivery room often reflects that intensity. As an obstetrician, you have to navigate not only the complex medical mechanics of childbirth, but also the highly charged emotional atmosphere of the room. You are dealing with screaming mothers, terrified partners, and the immense pressure of knowing that you are responsible for two lives simultaneously. The expectant fathers provide a constant source of both immense frustration and incredible dark comedy. While the mother is doing the monumental physical labor, the partners often struggle to cope with the sheer visceral reality of the situation. It is a remarkably common occurrence for a large, tough-looking man to take one glance at the blood, the needles, or the reality of a placenta and immediately pass out cold on the delivery room floor. Suddenly, the medical team has two patients to deal with: the woman actively pushing a human being out of her body and the partner who has just cracked his head open on the linoleum. You learn very quickly to position the partners away from the sharp instruments and to keep a watchful eye on them as they slowly turn a pale shade of green. Then there are the birth plans. In the modern era, many parents arrive at the hospital with highly detailed multi-page documents outlining exactly how they want their childbirth experience to go. They request specific mood lighting, carefully curated playlists of dolphin sounds and classical music, essential oil diffusers, and strict instructions about avoiding medical interventions. While the desire for a peaceful birth is entirely understandable, nature rarely reads the birth plan. As an obstetrician, you have to gently manage these expectations, knowing that childbirth is not a spa day. It is a high-stakes biological event. You smile politely when a patient requests to take her placenta home to blend into a nutritional smoothie, masking your internal horror with professional grace. But the true terrifying reality of obstetrics is how breathtakingly fast the situation can deteriorate. The transition from a peaceful, joyous birth to a catastrophic, life-threatening emergency can happen in a matter of seconds. One moment, you are chatting calmly with a mother about baby names while monitoring the fetal heart rate. The next moment, the monitor alarms sound, the baby's heart rate plummets, and the atmosphere in the room changes from calm to pure, electrified panic. This is the dreaded crash section, an emergency cesarean section where every single second counts. The adrenaline spike is absolute. You are sprinting alongside the patient's bed as they are wheeled frantically down the corridor towards the operating theater. The anesthesiologist is shouting orders. The nurses are prepping the instruments at lightning speed, and you are scrubbing your hands with an intensity that borders on violence. You have mere minutes to cut through layers of skin, fat, and muscle. Carefully open the uterus and extract a baby that is suffocating. Standing in the operating theater, covered in blood and amniotic fluid, the physical and mental toll of surgery becomes glaringly apparent. You are hunched over an operating table for hours, your muscles screaming in protest, sweat pooling under your surgical cap. Your hands must be perfectly steady, your decisions instantaneous and deeply calculated. You are navigating around vital organs, tying off bleeding vessels, and ensuring that both the mother and the baby survive the ordeal. When you successfully pull a blue, completely lifeless baby from the womb, hand it to the pediatric team, and watch as they vigorously resuscitate it until it turns pink and lets out a furious wail, the relief is so profound it makes your knees weak. This extreme emotional whiplash, bouncing between the highest joys of life and the absolute brink of death, sometimes multiple times in a single shift, requires a tremendous psychological resilience. You become addicted to the adrenaline, the fast pace, and the undeniable importance of the work. But this addiction comes at a severe cost. While you are pouring every ounce of your physical and emotional energy into the lives of your patients, The life you left behind outside the hospital walls begins to slowly, quietly wither away. Point 4. The crumbling illusion of a personal life. As you dive deeper into the relentless machinery of the hospital, a grim reality begins to set in. Medicine is not just a career, it is a terminal diagnosis for your social life. The hospital operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Disease does not respect weekends. Trauma does not take bank holidays off, and babies certainly do not wait for a convenient time to be born. Consequently, the concept of a normal personal life quickly becomes a crumbling illusion, a distant memory of a luxury you can no longer afford. You exist in a state of permanent subjugation to the rota, a fiercely unforgiving spreadsheet designed by administrators that dictates precisely when you are allowed to sleep, eat, and see the people you love. The impact this has on romantic relationships is devastating. Imagine trying to explain to your partner, time and time again, that you cannot attend their birthday dinner, your own anniversary, or a best friend's wedding because the rota coordinator has scheduled you for yet another weekend of night shifts. For Adam, the toll on his relationship with his partner H is a constant, underlying source of guilt and sorrow. You make reservations at nice restaurants, promising that this time you will absolutely be there. But then, an hour before you are supposed to leave, a patient hemorrhages, a complex surgery runs 3 hours over, or a sudden influx of emergencies floods the ward. You cannot simply clock out and leave a bleeding patient on the table because you have a dinner reservation. You stay. You always stay. When you do finally make it to a social event, you are usually a hollow, exhausted shell of a human being. You arrive hours late, smelling faintly of surgical scrub and hospital antiseptic, completely drained of all conversational energy. You sit at dinner parties, desperately trying to keep your eyes open, and inevitably, you fall asleep face first into your soup. Your non-medical friends try to be understanding at first, but the constant cancellations and the overwhelming exhaustion eventually create a rift. People simply stop inviting you to things because they know you will either cancel at the last minute or be miserable company if you do show up. Furthermore, the isolation of the profession becomes painfully apparent when you try to engage in normal conversation. Your entire world revolves around life, death, trauma, and bodily fluids. When your friends are complaining about a mildly annoying email from their boss or a delayed train, you find it nearly impossible to relate. How do you casually mention over a glass of wine that you spent your morning telling a family their mother is going to die? Or that you spent 4 hours surgically repairing a horrific third-degree vaginal tear? You quickly learn that non-medical people do not want to hear about the reality of your day. Your stories are too dark, too gross, and too depressing. So, you stop talking about work. You bottle it all up, retreating further into the isolated bubble of the medical community where dark humor and shared trauma are the only currencies that matter. Working holidays is perhaps the most depressing manifestation of this isolation. While the rest of the world is gathered around roaring fires, exchanging gifts, and eating enormous meals with their families, you are walking the sterile corridors of the hospital on Christmas Day. The administration attempts to inject a pathetic sliver of festive cheer into the environment. There is usually a sad plastic Christmas tree with a few broken baubles placed in the corner of the ward, and someone might wear a piece of tinsel around their stethoscope. But the reality is grim. The patients who are in the hospital on Christmas are the ones who are simply too sick to go home. The atmosphere is heavy with a unique kind of melancholy. You spend the day drawing blood, adjusting medications, and trying to offer a comforting smile to people who are spending the holiday lonely, frightened, and in pain. The stark contrast between the joyful expectations of the season and the grim reality of the ward is heartbreaking. You eat a lukewarm, pre-packaged hospital meal in the break room, missing your family fiercely and wondering why you chose a profession that demands such total, uncompromising sacrifice. The administration offers no sympathy for these sacrifices. To the management, your personal time is merely a buffer zone that can be encroached upon whenever the hospital is short-staffed. If a colleague calls in sick, you are expected to step in and cover their shift, regardless of your own plans or your own exhaustion. The guilt trips are masterful. You are constantly reminded that if you do not come in, patient safety will be compromised. The system essentially weaponizes your own sense of duty and empathy against you, forcing you to constantly prioritize the lives of strangers over your own well-being. Slowly, insidious emotional numbness begins to creep in. You pour so much of your empathy, your energy, and your emotional bandwidth into caring for your patients that there is absolutely nothing left in the tank for the people you actually love. You become short-tempered, distant, and perpetually anxious. You are giving everything you have to the hospital, allowing it to consume your youth, your relationships, and your peace of mind. And just when you think you have finally adapted to this grueling existence, the system rewards you by promoting you, drastically increasing your responsibilities, and stripping away whatever tiny safety net you had left. Point 5. Rising the ranks and faking confidence. In the rigid, hierarchical world of medicine, survival is rewarded with promotion. After enduring the grueling years as a junior house officer, battling sleep deprivation, and mastering the endless administrative tasks, you are finally elevated to the rank of registrar. To the outside world, this title sounds impressive and authoritative. To the junior doctors below you, you are suddenly the experienced veteran, the leader they look up to for guidance. But internally, the promotion to registrar is one of the most terrifying transitions in a doctor's career. You have crossed an invisible threshold. You are no longer the junior who can hide behind the decisions of others. You are the one the juniors call when things go catastrophically wrong. The terror of this new reality is perfectly encapsulated by the unofficial, terrifying mantra of medical training: see one, do one, teach one. In an ideal world, surgical training would involve years of meticulous, supervised practice before you are ever allowed to operate independently. In the chronically understaffed, chaotic reality of the NHS, this is a luxury that does not exist. The learning curve is practically vertical. You might watch a senior consultant perform a complex procedure once. A few weeks later, under immense pressure and perhaps with only minimal supervision, you are expected to perform that same procedure yourself. And shortly after that, you are the senior doctor in the room, expected to teach a terrified junior how to do it. This system breeds a profound, crippling sense of imposter syndrome. You find yourself standing in an operating theater, wearing the surgical gown, holding a scalpel over a patient, and looking around the room waiting for a real adult to walk in and take charge. The horrifying realization washes over you that you are the adult. The nurses are looking at you, the anesthesiologist is waiting for your signal, and the patient's life is entirely in your hands. You have to project an aura of absolute confidence and calm authority, even as your heart is hammering against your ribs and your mind is frantically trying to recall the exact anatomical diagrams from a textbook you read 3 years ago. Faking confidence becomes a vital clinical skill. If you show fear, the team loses faith, the panic spreads, and mistakes happen. You learn to wear the mask of leadership, projecting a steady certainty that you absolutely do not feel. As a registrar in obstetrics and gynecology, the stakes are astronomically high. When the consultant goes home to sleep, you are the senior doctor on the labor ward. You are the final line of defense between life and death. You endure shifts where you are making rapid-fire, split-second decisions on zero sleep. A midwife rushes up to you with a tray showing a baby whose heart rate is dangerously dropping. In that singular moment, you have to decide whether to wait and see, use forceps, or rush the mother to theater for a crash cesarean. Make the wrong call or hesitate for too long, and a baby suffers severe brain damage or dies. Make an overly aggressive call, and you subject a mother to a major, unnecessary abdominal surgery. The weight of this responsibility is crushing. You are essentially playing a high-stakes game of biological chess, where the penalty for a wrong move is a lifetime of tragedy for a family. In this high-pressure environment, the relationship between a registrar and the senior midwives becomes the most crucial dynamic on the ward. Midwives are the absolute backbone of the maternity unit. A veteran midwife has delivered thousands of babies. She has seen every conceivable complication, every variation of normal, and every warning sign of impending disaster. As a young, freshly minted registrar, you quickly learn that a senior midwife is a force of nature to be deeply respected and slightly feared. They do not suffer fools, and they have zero tolerance for arrogant young doctors who think their medical degree trumps decades of practical experience. A smart registrar learns to listen to the subtle cues of an experienced midwife. If a midwife casually suggests, "Doctor, perhaps we should consider moving to theater," it is not a suggestion. It is a polite, coded command from someone who knows the situation is about to deteriorate. They guide you, they quietly correct your mistakes, and they save your career on a weekly basis. The dynamic is a delicate dance of mutual respect. You have the surgical skills and the legal authority, but they have the profound, intuitive knowledge of the laboring woman. Together, you form an unbreakable team, fighting against the unpredictable chaos of childbirth. Yet, despite the incredible teamwork and the moments of profound triumph when a difficult delivery is successful, the physical and mental exhaustion of the registrar years compounds heavily. You are working at the very edge of your cognitive limits. Studies have shown that making complex decisions after being awake for 24 hours is the cognitive equivalent of being legally drunk. Yet, this is exactly what the system demands of its registrars. You are expected to perform intricate surgeries, communicate complex medical risks to terrified patients, and lead a team of junior staff, all while operating in a state of severe, chronic sleep deprivation. You are no longer just fighting disease and managing emergencies. You are actively fighting the crumbling infrastructure of the hospital system itself. Point 6. The absurdity of the hospital bureaucracy. As you rise through the ranks and gain a broader view of the hospital ecosystem, the focus shifts from merely surviving the medical emergencies to battling the infuriating, mind-numbing absurdity of the administrative bureaucracy. The National Health Service, NHS, is a glorious, noble, and deeply flawed institution. It is founded on the beautiful principle of providing free, world-class healthcare to absolutely anyone who needs it, regardless of their ability to pay. But behind this noble ideal is a sprawling, creaking, massively underfunded infrastructure that is held together almost entirely by duct tape, sheer willpower, and the unpaid goodwill of its staff. The frustration of navigating this broken system is a daily torment. You are a highly trained medical professional, capable of performing complex surgeries and saving lives, yet you are constantly defeated by the most basic logistical failures. The hospital IT systems are a running joke, operating on clunky, ancient software that looks like it was designed in the mid-1990s. Computers take 10 minutes to boot up, constantly crash in the middle of writing crucial patient notes, and are incredibly scarce. Doctors are regularly forced to roam the wards like scavengers, desperately hunting for a working computer or a chair with all four wheels intact just to do their jobs. Then there is the issue of physical space and resources. The hospital is in a permanent state of being overcapacity. There are simply not enough beds for the number of sick people coming through the doors. You find yourself treating patients in cupboards, assessing them in crowded corridors, and constantly apologizing for the lack of dignity the system provides. You spend hours on the phone, begging and negotiating with other departments to find a single available bed for a critically ill patient, acting more like a desperate real estate agent than a doctor. But perhaps the most infuriating aspect of the bureaucracy is the hospital administration and management. The hospital is governed by a layer of managers and executives who often have absolutely no clinical background. They walk the wards in their sharp suits, carrying clipboards, enforcing arbitrary rules, and focusing entirely on targets, spreadsheets, and budgets. They will send out aggressive emails demanding to know why a patient breached the 4-hour waiting target in the emergency department, completely ignoring the fact that the department was flooded with major trauma cases and was operating with half the required nursing staff. The disconnect between the boardroom and the reality of the ward is staggering. They view the hospital as a factory that needs to hit production targets, while the medical staff view it as a desperate triage zone. The absurdity of the system is perfectly encapsulated by the great hospital parking saga. It is a universal truth in the NHS that parking at your own workplace is a complex, expensive, and deeply insulting ordeal. Doctors who are working 90-hour weeks and literally saving lives are forced to pay exorbitant daily fees just to park their cars at the hospital. The process of applying for a staff parking permit involves filling out mountains of paperwork, proving your necessity, and waiting months for approval, only to be charged a small fortune for the privilege. It is the ultimate irony. You are dedicating your life and sacrificing your health for an institution that treats you as a captive revenue stream before you even walk through the front door. This broken bureaucracy exists against a constant backdrop of political interference. Politicians use the healthcare system as a massive political football, constantly scoring cheap points in the media while fundamentally misunderstanding the reality on the ground. They announce grand new initiatives, promise unrealistic improvements, and impose new, punishing contracts on junior doctors, all while steadily cutting funding and resources. The narrative spun by the government often paints doctors as greedy or militant when they dare to complain about working conditions, completely ignoring the fact that the system is literally crushing them. The only reason the entire crumbling edifice does not simply collapse into dust is because of the sheer, uncompromising resilience of the staff. The nurses, the porters, the midwives, the junior doctors, and the consultants. They all absorb the failures of the system. They work hours they are not paid for. They skip meals. They sacrifice their physical and mental health. And they endure the bureaucratic insults because of their profound dedication to the patients. They form a human shield between the broken system and the vulnerable people who need care. But human shields can only take so much battering before they begin to crack. The exhaustion deepens, the frustration mounts, and the psychological burden grows heavier with every shift. You can laugh at the absurdity, you can fight the bureaucracy, and you can survive the exhaustion. But you are always walking a tightrope. And all it takes is one catastrophic, unavoidable tragedy to make you lose your balance completely. Point 7. The day the laughter suddenly stopped. In the life of every medical professional, there is a distinct line drawn in the sand. There is the career you had before the incident, and the shattered reality you are forced to navigate afterward. Up until this point, you survived the chaos of the hospital through dark humor, cynical detachment, and the sheer momentum of exhaustion. You believe that if you follow the protocols, study the textbooks, and make the right clinical decisions, you can outsmart death. But medicine is not a perfect science. It is a brutal game of probabilities. And eventually, the odds turn against you in the most devastating way possible. For Adam, this turning point arrived on what began as a completely ordinary, unremarkable shift. The day started like any other. The ward was busy, the bleep was active, and the usual rhythm of the hospital was completely normal. The patient was a lovely, healthy, expectant mother. Her pregnancy had been entirely smooth, and there were no red flags in her notes. She was admitted for what was supposed to be a routine procedure. There was no sense of impending doom, no dramatic warning signs. In obstetrics, the line between total calm and absolute catastrophic disaster is incredibly thin, but you never expect to cross it without warning. The descent into the nightmare was immediate and violent. Without any prior indication, the patient began to hemorrhage. The word hemorrhage in a medical context is often misunderstood by the public as a heavy bleed. In this specific, horrifying context, it meant a massive, uncontrollable loss of blood volume that immediately threatened the life of both the mother and the unborn child. The diagnosis became terrifyingly clear: an undiagnosed placenta previa, a condition where the placenta has attached itself directly over the exit of the uterus, acting like a massive, highly vascular tumor. The atmosphere in the room shattered. The calm conversation vanished, replaced by the sheer, electrified panic of a true medical emergency. The crash buzzer was hit, unleashing a piercing, agonizing alarm across the entire floor. In seconds, the room flooded with people: midwives, anesthetists, nurses, and senior consultants. The mother's blood pressure plummeted, as her heart desperately tried to pump blood that was no longer there. The fetal heart monitor, which had been tracking the steady, reassuring heartbeat of the baby, began to sound a terrifying, decelerating alarm. The baby was suffocating in the womb. The rush to the operating theater was a blur of shouting and sprinting. The doors swung open, and the surgical team scrambled with frantic, terrifying speed. The mother was rapidly put under general anesthesia. Adam, standing beside the senior consultant, scrubbed in, his heart hammering in his throat. When they made the incision and opened the uterus, the reality of the situation was a scene of unimaginable horror. The sheer volume of blood was overwhelming. It defied logic. It felt as though the blood was hitting the ceiling, pooling on the floor, soaking through the surgical gowns. They were fighting a losing battle against a ruptured dam. In the midst of this chaotic, blood-soaked battlefield, the primary objective was to extract the baby as quickly as humanly possible. They reached in, fighting blindly through the hemorrhage, and pulled the infant free. The baby was handed immediately to the waiting pediatric resuscitation team. There was no cry. There was no movement. The baby was completely, terrifyingly pale and limp. While the pediatricians began the desperate, frantic process of chest compressions and adrenaline injections on the newborn, Adam and the consultant had to immediately return their focus to the mother, who was rapidly bleeding to death on the table. The placenta was morbidly adherent, refusing to detach, tearing the uterine wall and unleashing even more blood. They threw every surgical technique, every drug, and every ounce of their skill at the problem. They packed the uterus, they tied off major arteries, but the bleeding would not stop. In order to save the mother's life, they were forced to make the ultimate, devastating decision: a life-saving emergency hysterectomy. They had to remove her womb entirely, permanently stripping her of the ability to ever carry another child, just to stop her from dying on the table. After what felt like an eternity of frantic, highly coordinated desperation, the mother was finally stabilized. She was critically ill, heavily sedated, and transferred to the intensive care unit, hovering on the brink of death but alive. The silence that fell over the operating theater was absolute and crushing. The pediatric team had stopped their compressions. Despite their most frantic, heroic efforts, the baby could not be revived. The time of death was called. Adam stood in the corner of the theater, covered up to his elbows in the blood of the mother, staring at the tiny, lifeless body of the infant. The adrenaline that had fueled the frenzied surgery suddenly evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hollow, and utterly paralyzing void. The dark humor that had shielded him for years was useless here. The cynicism was gone. There was only the raw, unfiltered reality of an unbearable tragedy. They had done everything right. They had followed every protocol, moved with lightning speed, and fought with everything they had. But it wasn't enough. The baby was dead. The mother was mutilated and fighting for her life in the ICU. And the laughter, which had echoed through the corridors for years, suddenly and permanently died. Point 8. The conclusion. The true cruelty of the medical profession is not just the trauma you endure. It is the absolute lack of space you are given to process it. In the immediate aftermath of the catastrophic hemorrhage and the death of the baby, there was no pause. There was no moment of quiet reflection. No psychological support team waiting to debrief the traumatized staff. The bloody surgical gowns were thrown into the incinerator bin, the floors were mopped with bleach, and the crushing machinery of the hospital demanded that they simply carry on. Adam was expected to sit down, meticulously write up the surgical notes of the disaster, wash his hands, and walk into the next room to smile at another expectant mother, as if his entire world had not just collapsed. This toxic culture of the stiff upper lip is deeply ingrained in the medical field. Doctors are conditioned to believe that showing emotional vulnerability is a sign of clinical weakness. You are expected to compartmentalize the horror, pack it tightly into a dark box in your mind, and lock it away. But trauma of that magnitude cannot be contained. The psychological fallout for Adam was immediate and devastating. He developed severe, crippling symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. The confident, capable registrar who could manage a chaotic labor ward with a dark joke and a steady hand, was gone. He began to relentlessly second-guess every single decision he made. He would wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, his heart racing, hallucinating the sound of the fetal heart monitor dropping. When he stood in the operating theater for routine procedures, his hands would shake. He was paralyzed by the terrifying realization that no matter how skilled you are, disaster can strike without warning, and you will be the one holding the scalpel when the music stops. He sought help, but the system offered none. He was a broken cog in a machine that only valued efficiency. The agonizing realization slowly dawned on him. He could not do this anymore. The emotional armor had completely shattered, and without it, the daily realities of the hospital were unbearable. Making the decision to hang up his stethoscope was not a relief. It was an agonizing, heartbreaking surrender. He was giving up years of grueling medical school, years of brutal training, and a career he had sacrificed his entire youth to build. More profoundly, he was giving up his identity. Being a doctor is not just a job, it is who you are. Walking away meant stepping into an absolute void. The day he handed in his resignation and walked out of the hospital doors for the last time, he left behind the only life he had ever known. However, leaving the hospital did not mean staying silent. The diary entries that documented the hilarity, the exhaustion, and the ultimate tragedy of his medical career evolved into something much larger, a passionate, furious, and deeply moving open letter to the public and to the politicians who govern the NHS. The book culminates in a direct challenge to the Secretary of State for Health, who at the time was pushing a narrative that junior doctors were greedy and lacked dedication. Adam's story serves as a fierce, uncompromising defense of the people who wear the scrubs. It strips away the political rhetoric and exposes the raw, bleeding truth of what it actually means to be a junior doctor. It is a plea for the public to understand that the doctors and nurses treating them are not infallible robots. They are human beings who are missing their own children's bedtimes, destroying their own relationships, and sacrificing their own mental health to keep strangers alive. They are working in a system that is fundamentally broken, held together only by their extraordinary, unpaid goodwill. Ultimately, this story is a tragic love letter to the National Health Service and a stark, urgent warning. It asks the reader to look past the frustrating waiting times, the broken chairs, and the administrative chaos, and to see the profound humanity of the staff. It asks you to be kind to the exhausted junior doctor who might be a little short-tempered at 3 in the morning because you have no idea what horror they just witnessed in the room next door. They are breaking themselves to fix us, and the very least we can do is recognize their sacrifice, fight for their well-being, and never, ever take them for granted.